Here we go.
Good.
So, good morning or good afternoon. We are here to discuss several topics in Buddha Dharma pertaining to causal relationships of attainability of liberation, the relationship of cause and effect between the worlds of samsara and nirvana, and what else did we decide on discussing?
I'll just check the feed. Hang on. Andrei.
The things about conceptuality, I believe, were also there regarding what exactly is the role of concepts towards the path, and what do we really mean by instrumental value? How did it give rise to different interpretations across Tibetan schools and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a good start. And
that's
then we'll see.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So which one of them would you like to start discussing?
Well, there's this sort of discrepancy between the statement that nirvana and samsara of one taste, should we say?
Yeah, sure.
And then whether they have a causal relationship or not, and or whether they're of one taste. Because if they're one taste, it would imply that they don't have a causal relationship. Perhaps.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
That's fair. I mean, you can say that water and ice are of one taste, and you can still say there's some sort of causal relationship between them. It's, they're just different kind of physical forms of each other, and depending on the, I guess, environmental conditions and so forth that they're placed in, they can affect its solidity or liquidity or whatever else, and maybe that can be transposed into the teachings of the path and the seed and the fruit. It's not just that we need the seed of bodhicitta and the seed of innate Buddhahood, but we need, ideal conditions to develop that kind of seed to make it grow and transform ourselves into ways to reach all sentient beings and develop the necessary skills and methods to be able to not only overcome our own obstacles, but also be able to help others overcome their own obstacles. So maybe that's one way of working around this problem of saying, yeah, even though they're of one taste, we can still maintain some sort of causal connection between them. I'm not sure if you'd agree.
Would you say that a seed and its resultant sprout are of one taste?
I think we're getting into ambiguities of what one taste really means. I mean,
problem, yeah. That's the problem, isn't it? What do they, when they say one taste, what do they mean?
Sure.
So traditional approach is to say that they both have the ultimate nature of lack of true existence.
Sure. I mean, that's sort of what I was kind of having difficulties with, and Serkong Rinpoche slightly touched on it on a couple of occasions, but it's not a question of doubt. I just think it's a question of misunderstanding, which is that when we are talking about nirvana being there from beginningless time, in the sense of the truth is already here, it is up for us to purify our karmas and reach the state of, experiencing whatever liberation means. But at the same time, ignorance follows a similar kind of metaphysical narrative where we say, look, also ignorance has been an imprint in our mind streams since beginningless time. So I'm kind of having difficulties understanding. So what do we really mean then when we say that they are both somewhat existent, if even existent is the right word then, because we cannot describe any sort of temporal stamp on it, so to say. Usually when we say something exists, we defer to impermanence. We kind of talk about it in terms of, well, at this point we can associate such and such qualities or properties to that object, but everything is bound by the links of interdependent origination. So at some point or another, it's going to undergo significant transformations. But it seems that, when we talk about this relationship between ignorance and wisdom, I'm not entirely sure how they could have both coexisted since beginningless time, whatever that means.
I wouldn't say that if you take one individual's continuum, then nirvana, I would say, has not existed in that continuum yet. Like in my continuum, nirvana has never existed in my continuum. Like that, perhaps that's more of a Galupa approach. But because if you define nirvana as the removal, at least of, let's say, the afflictive emotions and their seeds, then that's never happened for me.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you put it as one, I mean, if you sort of take that idea that you've got beginningless time, then you can't really sort of say that it sort of gets a bit complicated, because there were always Buddhas, or but then weren't those Buddhas sentient beings before that? So it's a bit so probably easier if you take one sentient being's continuum, and then it's harder to say that nirvana has existed since beginningless time for that person.
Yes, I think there's two things here. The first one is, what do we really define enlightenment to be in the first place? As you said, the Ganden interpretation is more insisting on negations. So when we talk about liberation, we talk about the state with no affliction, no ignorance, no decomposition, and so forth. And that is peace in some way or another.
Yeah.
Whereas, some schools may take a more positive interpretation and say, it's not only that. I'm pretty sure they're not necessarily trying to negate that, those experiences of bliss or whatever explanatory route they choose to take is not in some way contradictory to this lack of affliction, the lack of kleshas and whatever else. But it's not only that. There's a supplement there. There's a complementary explanation there, because the lack of ignorance leads to, some sort of wisdom of equanimity, or of all accomplishing wisdom, or whichever kind of, explanatory path they choose. And then they say the resultant of that also has some sort of positive benefits, in the sense of, the lack of such and such experience. It's like the lack of being sick is also being healthy at the same time. It's not just not being sick, but there's also some other qualities that are being emanated when you negate the state. And
I think the Galupas will have a very strict interpretation, so they'll call the like the Yeshichugu. If you talk about Chugu, the Dharmakaya, then they split it into two, and one is the Yeshichugu, which is the wisdom Dharmakaya, and then the other one is the No Nigu, which is the kind of nature Dharmakaya or something like that. Swabhavakaya. So the Swabhavakaya for them will be the nirvana, and then you will, as you say, you definitely like you say, it's a good example. The absence of being sick is what we would call being healthy. So the absence of removal of all your ignorance would have a correlate in being wise, but then they will attribute that not to nirvana itself, but to the Dharmakaya, with the wisdom Dharmakaya. So it's just kind of a little bit like the way they divided up the Gokden, the cessation, right? The truth of cessation. So they'll sort of home in on that as being the removal of all kind of stains. Let's call it stains or something. Well, and the removal of all suffering as well.
Sure. Would you say that imprints is a good enough synonym to stains, or are you trying to say something else?
No, probably because stains a bit more all-encompassing, which would encompass the manifest sort of negative minds, whether it's ignorance or, and then it's a desire, attachment, but then also those seeds. I think all schools will accept that, the kind of imprints. So the imprints is the subtlest form, but it's also removal of all ignorance, grasping into existence, or tenzin. For Kajuiningma, it's kind of tenzin, the grasping at some form of characteristic nature. So remove all of that. I think probably you have to use this. It's the word jima. I was just looking in here, Timan and Jeba. Yeah, dimmer stains. I'll just look it up in my dictionary. Stains, but yeah, probably it's more encompassing.
Okay. So would you say then that Gelugpa would agree to say that nirvana is the cessation of the 12 links of interdependent origination? Because that's framing liberation in negative terms also, right? It's not some sort of positive story of saying we overcome the cycle of rebirth, but it's rather saying our mind stream ceases to experience the 12 links of interdependent origination, and that is itself nirvana of some sorts.
You probably have to be a little bit careful in a debate. You'd probably be a bit wary of accepting that thesis, but broadly speaking, you might say that. But then they have to accept that fourth sort of statement of the Four Seals, that nirvana is peace. So there's, I don't think there. I think I think where people feel that the Gelugpas are being sort of always negative, so to speak, is really in terms of of emptiness and their insistence that it's Nagarjuna's non-affirming negative. But yeah, you're probably right. I think they're probably right. They probably do speak more in terms of even the lack of the 12, the breaking of the 12 links. And the opposite, right? If ignorance doesn't arise, then karmic formation, and yeah, like that would be the. You could say, yeah, because you'd have to break all ignorance to stop that process happening.
Right. It's like if you want to stop all aging and death, you'd have to stop all grasping, which in backwards, you'd have to start you'd have to seize all consciousness, you'd have to seize all contact and sense objects, and for that you'd have to seize self-grasping and then ignorance and so forth. So yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I suppose in a sense it's, but then you have the fourth thing about nirvana is peace, the fourth seal. So you also have to accept that they would have to accept that process, like you said, on the other side, on the positive side of it, is a peaceful state. I have to accept that because it's one of the four seals of Buddhism. Correct. I mean, it's not only that, but if nirvana is defined as peace, which can be loosely paralleled with the cessation of the links, then you can say that we can think about the 5 poisons, or like the 3 general poisons of the bhava chakra: ignorance, aversion, and desires, and so forth. Or if we look at the 5 poisons in the typical Mahayana text, right? There's pride, there's anger or wrath, there's doubt or whatever else, and jealousy and delusion and whatever else. I mean, different teachers also, it's not only a matter of schools, but even within schools themselves, different teachers kind of define these notions differently, or they choose slightly different words for them. But broadly speaking, this would be an example of the set of the 5 sort of kind of fundamental poisons or afflictions or kleshas or whatever else. So insofar as there's no arising of the klesha, then that would lead to peace, right? Klesha leads to those cognitive dissonances, to that internal conflict of whatever, whether be it emotional conflict or acting out of impulse or whatever else. So insofar as those kleshas don't manifest, as Serkong Rinpoche was saying, that it's like if there's an imprint, but then if you don't provide the environment for that imprint to ripen, then it just stops arising. He was kind of giving it in the example of ignorance, right? It's like if you kind of work around, if you recognize the causes and conditions that gave rise to that imprint, then in some sense your meditative analysis is one step above the causal relations that left that imprint of ignorance on the mind stream. So if there can be some sort of method to overcome that, or ensure that ignorance doesn't occur, then slowly that imprint would diminish, since it ceases to ripen again, kind of thing.
Yeah. You don't continue to engage in it, and it loses its power, and then you get rid of the manifest one. But probably for galupas you don't get rid of the seeds, which probably that means that there's still an appearance of true existence, even if there's no grasping at true existence.
But would,
the appearance.
sure. But wouldn't they say that that's residual, in the sense of you can practice with residual karma and something that's nearer a state of perfection or completion? So then the karmic activities and sort of engagement with the path that has a higher degree of certainty and a higher degree of success is going to manifest in a particular aspect, and the kind of karmic engagements of sort of that require pacification or something else would have some sort of residual imprint that leads to appearances. But since there are a plethora of karmas that we experience, and some qualities that we may have would be maybe more advanced than others, then eventually the residual ones would cease as well, insofar as there is some sort of balance of deferring to the less residual kind of imprints to tackle on.
Yeah, you'd have to get rid of the sort of manifest minds grasping at true existence first, and then only then would you start to, for galupas this would be, you would start to tackle the imprints themselves that left on by those. So it's kind of that analogy of the removing the garlic from the pot, but you still have to keep cleaning the pot because the smell has seeped into the material of the pot, that kind of thing. So it's sort of there, but it's not causing manifest disruption, but it's still causing everything to appear to you as truly existent.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of an analogy a Christian priest gave one time, which is that even if you go to confession and you do the sacraments and you purify the sin, it would be like putting a nail on a piece of wood, on a block of wood. So even though you remove the nail and the rust may stop spreading in the wood and so forth, there's still the imprint that's left by the nail on the wood. But then I think the difficulty with going with that view is then, well, that seems almost nearly impossible to overcome. I think that just leaves us in some sort of position where it's like, what better than this do we have? What else is there in the human capacity to do beyond constantly trying?
That's an excellent analogy, I think, because you've still got the, like you say, if you nail, like here, we're in these rooms are made of concrete, right? So
yeah.
I'm a photographer and I actually would like to put lots of pictures up on the wall, but then these walls are like, if you try to hammer nails into it, it'll just crack the plaster, You can't, even with a drill, I haven't been able to get through. So, if you bang something into it, you can't go back. There's no, like if you bang a nail into a piece of wood, you can never go back to the wood could never go back exactly to how it was when you pull it out. There'll always be that, the shape of the nail in the wood, I suppose the imprints are something like that. They're left there. You can't. I mean, you get rid of them. You can get rid of them, but those are the last things to go on the subtle level of the path.
Well, wouldn't you say that that's leaning towards eternalism? If you use words like never, where you say, well, we can never do anything to change it, wouldn't that somehow bring difficulties for laws of impermanence and so forth? I mean, people.
You can definitely you can get rid of them. I mean, otherwise, if you couldn't get rid of them, you wouldn't be able to be liberated. You can get rid of them, but they're pretty. You know, that I was an alcoholic, right? So if you, I mean, I'm never going to drink. I'm pretty sure I'll never drink again. But it still leaves, the alcoholism leaves a pattern of some form of habits, you know, that are still left over from doing that kind of thing. Not to drink again, because I'll probably never drink again. I've not drunk for 24 years, 25 years, but I drank very heavily for 10. And so there's a kind of imprint that's left over, and then part of my life has been to deal with that, even though I'm not drinking and it's not disrupting my life in that way. It still has some kind of mental effect, you know, the kind of addictive personality. So a bit later, so those are almost more difficult to deal with because they're much more subtle, you know. And so the imprints would be, I mean, we're talking about in terms of the path, and I think all traditions would agree that we're talking beyond the path of seeing. When you start to really remove the pervasive power of grasping at true existence. But in the, you know, outside of meditative equipoise, you can understand things as an illusion, but there's still this thing of true appearance. It's still, even if you know that it's a trick, it's still happening to you, you know, the appearance of true existence. So you're not manifestly clinging, but there's this so it's almost more difficult because it's more, and as it gets more and more subtle, you'd almost probably think that you got rid of it all. I think there's stories of that, you know, people think that they're done, right? But actually it's just another subtle level. So they're quite pervasive, those things. Not that it affects me, because I'm not, I've got plenty of gross, you know, full on grasping at true existence. So, but even those refined levels, very, very subtle level, very powerful meditation on emptiness to remove very subtle forms of kind of not grasping but appearance.
I mean, I'm not trying to disagree that sometimes you know, even if you stop a vicious activity, there are reoccurring kind of, you know, internal difficulties that someone has to have. But I'm just not sure if the kind of resolve isn't a little pessimistic. It seems like one of these answers it's one of those you know, the treatment is worse than the disease kind of thing. It's like if you tell somebody that they can never get rid of it, or that it's so difficult to overcome it, that can feel, for people that don't have, you know, the kind of willpower that you had, for example, or something, you know, what would that, you know, they could feel very discouraged to even try to seek some sort of transformative mechanism for them to improve their conduct in some way. So
yeah, because really what they're talking about, if we accept, and all of them are talking about pretty similar things, there's sort of you know, there's some disagreements, but the broad outline is the same, is that, yeah, that's right, it is, yeah, it's a good analogy, the treatment is almost, it's not worse, but it's what you'd start to reveal to someone is the kind of the kind of mess that they're in, you know. And so you have these, you know, there's I think it's in the Lankavatara Sutra, it's that great analogy. The Chittamartins use it a lot about, you know, how there was a story of a people who are going to collect jewels. It's a story, and they're sailing across the ocean, and they find, how is it? It sort of goes like they're in stages, so they have to take a rest on particular islands for a while, and then the merchant says, no, we have to go to the next one. And when they've rested up, they move on to the next one. You know, that kind of, yeah, you have to, yeah. It's sort of, because it could be very discouraging to hear how much of a mess our minds are in. You know, we're not just talking about, you know, not being so angry or something like that. You know, it's very subtle levels.
No,
It's discouraging.
I haven't read the sutra. It's 2,000 pages longer, so
I haven't read it.
Yeah.
It's in one of my Prajna Paramita course things. They had this example. It's a very nice analogy. It's sort of just talking about, you know, the need for the different vehicles and stuff. People of different capacities.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
a nice analogy.
But I think that that brings, you know, both kind of positives and negatives with it, because we think about, you know, one of the paramitas being joyful efforts, but then
Yeah,
we speak of the Buddha as effortlessly liberating sentient beings. So it seems that at some point, after you have sufficiently purified most of the imprints or residual karmas or whatever else, there doesn't seem to be the same level of kind of difficulty with engaging with the practice sorts of thing. It seems maybe that's kind of the upside of it. It's like if we do get through these sorts of, you know, difficult periods, eventually our kind of body and mind familiarizes itself with the efficiency or the benefits of practice itself, and then it just becomes easier along the way, kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, they do. They talk about, you know, you know, I think it's the sixth Bodhisattva Bhumi has this, you know, Rabdagawa, the excellent kind of, you know, amazing kind of joy, you know. So yeah, they definitely. Yeah, I think the trouble is that, but the trouble is in our condition, those things seem a long way away, and therefore, you know. But as you say, as you continue on the path, you would get you're right. You sort of get this reward as well. It's it all looks a bit negative, doesn't it? You've got to get rid of this, and you've got this fault and that fault, and if it's just presented on that sense that you have all this rubbish inside of you that you've got to clear up, but nobody's focusing on the fact that if you've got I'm a pretty untidy person. If you've got a very untidy room and you start to clear up, the room actually starts to get less untidy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a positive. And every time I do half an hour of tidying up, the room is more tidy, and it feels more spacious and comfortable. So I think that yeah. But yeah, sometimes it can seem a bit discouraging.
Yeah. I think this is a good segue to talking about concepts and different approaches to
Sure.
the instrumental value of concepts. Maybe
Yeah.
you can say a little more about the Ganden view of what can concepts really do. At least to my understanding, Je Rinpoche was trying to illustrate two types of, you know, Jetsun Dragpa Gyaltsen has this thing about two types of ultimates, the concordant and non-concordant ultimate, sometimes, you know, described as the ultimate truth that we talk about, because linguistically we have to refer to some sort of entity or abstract concept. So that's a type of ultimate truth, type A, the bona fide kind of, you know, ultimate truth. But then there's the real, so to say, ultimate truth that is non-referential and we cannot say anything in our language about. But I think Je Rinpoche makes the other move around. It's not that we have two types of ultimate truth, but we have two types of conventionals, kind of thing. And then our concepts permeate differently from in the conventional space and how we do our analysis on emptiness. And then I was just wondering how kind of Jetsun Kappa clarifies what he means by these kind of types and distinctions and so on.
He does actually. There's a slightly controversial section. I haven't located it for a while in Lamrim Chenmo where he uses those namtangi dundam and namtram mayimbi dundam, the concordant and discordant, or what do they call it? I like to use this Padmakara dictionary, Padmakarpo dictionary.
I believe it's concordant and non-concordant.
Yeah, so they use namtram dandembi dundam. So he says assessed and unassessed. This is Tony Duff. So what he means when he says it here is assessed superfactual truth, because he likes to use the word superfactual truth. I don't like to use that, but so he says assessed and unassessed. So what he's saying is using for the word namtrang and namtrang maimba. He's saying it has been known, unassessed truth has not been known. It has been known in direct perception. an assessed superfactual truth is. So that doesn't really work. Anyway, J. Rinpoche uses those terms in a quote in Lamrim Chenmo, and it's a little bit ambiguous what he's saying there. Some scholars have sort of raised the doubt as to whether he might be using it the way that the early translation schools have used it, to almost talk about two different objects, rather than how J. Rinpoche wants to see it, is that there's one object, which is let's call it emptiness, and that emptiness can be seen in two different ways, but it's exactly the same thing. The one that's seen by the inferential valid cognition of emptiness is the real emptiness, and the one that's seen in the meditative equipoise on emptiness is the real emptiness, and they're exactly the same object. There's no difference in the object, it's just a different kind of mind which is seeing, different quality of mind which is seeing it. Whereas the early translation schools are saying, no, that there's one, like you said, the one that can be referred to, can be thought about, can be expressed, can be conceptualized, and then there's one that can't. And the one that can't is the one in meditative equipoise. And they say that they're two different things. One is not the other. Whereas J. Rinpoche says they are the same thing. So, for instance, the last moment of the path of preparation, the meditation that focuses on, for the early translation schools, they have this problem because the last moment of is the what did you call it?
Concordant.
Concordant. So I'm trying to name it. Concordant.
They translate it as tumpe dunam. Tumpe dudam.
Okay. That's so tumpe dunam is what, the one that the conceptual mind can access.
Yes, that is the concordant.
Okay, so yeah, common or something. Tumbe, commonly accessible, maybe is probably. So that one,
conceptually accessible, I think is.
Yeah, let's call it that. As it's not a very good translation, but it's more meaningful. So that one would be the last moment of the path of preparation, and in the next moment you'll access the other one. So the Galupas are sort of saying, well, this is not concordant because you're changing your object. So how does that happen? Because you're not meditating on the same thing. Whereas for J. Rinpoche, you're meditating on the same thing, and then it sort of segues into direct perception, probably due to this massive build-up of karma or something, and meditative experience and kind of calm, sort of building up of strong bodhicitta or something, and then you kind of segue into, but this object is the same. So the Galupas will sort of criticize the early schools for that, because they say that you have to change the object when you step up to the first moment of the path of seeing.
Okay. Well, let's try the reverse engineering process with this too.
Yeah.
And say, okay, let's assume the Ganden position and say, okay, fine. So it is the same entity, be it concordant or not. It is just at different stages on the path, it is seen and then later on conceptualized differently. If I'm kind of paraphrasing it correctly.
Conceptualized and then seen. Sort of like
okay, that's kind of the symmetry that I'm trying to understand, because then somebody can say, okay, so let's say I agree with J. Rinpoche's view, and then I say on the path of seeing, I acknowledge that the ultimate truth, that the whatever experiential content my mind stream experiences when the sounds of ultimate truth, or the kind of whatever semantic kind of box is there with ultimate truth, it gets internalized. There's one thing, and then even on the path of seeing, I acknowledge in the analytic meditation that there is another way, of a more subtle way to understand this content of ultimate truth, that is even kind of gate para samgate kind of thing. So it's even ever so subtler than whatever experience I have when the concept of ultimate truth passes through the mind stream. And then that practitioner enters into the path of the, so preparation and then into seeing, right? That's how he frames it. Okay, so from preparation to seeing, and then that practitioner enters the path of seeing, and then the practitioner is like, whoa, now when the notion of ultimate truth passes through the mind stream, there's a different experiential content that comes with it. And then but
Yes,
how does that affect the practitioner's ability to describe ultimate truth? Does, like, insofar as the experience changes or is elevated or progresses or whatever other word you want to use, then that practitioner also has to be able to describe ultimate truth in different ways than it was only on the path of preparation. Once that practitioner is on the path of seeing, their mind stream should open themselves to a kind of experience that enables that practitioner to talk about ultimate truth differently than they would have been able to earlier, right? So I think if this reversal holds up, then at least you can say that the argument is decent, right?
I mean, yeah, it's like yeah, if you've been down to the shops, and every time you go into the shops they have a particular kind of ice cream. You've tasted some kinds of ice cream before, but there's one particular special kind of flavor. You haven't tried it, but you keep seeing it, you keep thinking you're going to buy it, but you don't actually buy it, but you have some idea what ice cream tastes like, and you try to describe it to someone. But then the next day you save up enough money and you go down and buy the special kind of ice cream, the sort of Ben and Jerry's new Trump flavor or something. Is it protest flavor or something? I can't remember what it is. It's got all the different black, white, brown, and everything in it. So let's say there's a really, like some really special Italian gelato or something that the top of the best ice cream you can get.
Sure.
So you actually go, and then you buy that and taste it, and then before you talked about what you thought the flavor might be and how it would taste, but it's very different experiencing it and then explaining to someone else, no, you really have to have this. There's a shop here that started making amazing mango cheesecake. So for a while I didn't buy it, but once I tasted it, now I tell everyone, this is what you have to eat. Don't buy the other cake. You're wasting your money. So I think there is, yeah. I mean, thinking even regular examples that happens. But I think that we can't use the word notion. We have to use something like, it's an experience, right? It's if you have a very favorite piece of classical music that you've always wanted to listen to, once you've listened to that, like really listen to it, go to a concert, go to some, like like in Vienna or something, go to the Vienna Symphony and you listen to them play your favorite piece of music. Now you've listened to it at home on your whatever device, and even if you have a very nice sound system at home, but when you go to the concert, then that's a famous piano player or something, the most famous piano, then you have a very different experience, and you can talk about. I mean, I think you'll know more about this than me in terms of language and philosophy, but you're still stuck with the same problem, and that's the only way to express it. The experience is to use language and concept.
Yeah.
You got to say to someone, you've got to buy a ticket for this concert. You've got to get a ticket. It's the most amazing. I went to this Chinese opera in Taiwan back in the 90s, and a friend took me, and it was at the Taiwan National Museum, the Gugong, outside at night with these stars, and I mean, I didn't understand a word they were talking about. It was a Chinese version of Macbeth, and Macbeth I know very well, but it was the most amazing experience. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. I don't know what they were saying, but I had an experience, and I would say to anyone, you got to go and see this, So it's like that. We can express things, but we can't actually. I can't tell you in language what that experience was, apart from to say it was amazing. I can't give you my experience of that.
Mm.
And you could say, well, actually, I had a similar experience with the Vienna Orchestra playing Bach or something, and I could relate to what you said, but I can't experience what you experienced. I could go, I think we're talking about the same thing, like with poetry and stuff. You can get a feeling for stuff, but how do you give the actual experience,
But at that point, I don't understand how this explanation is different from the early translation explanation. They would say the same thing, right? They would say
They
it
would
just
say,
can't be
like,
put
yeah,
into words.
yeah, they'd say the same thing. They just don't want to accept. They don't want to accept that. They're coming from the ultimate level, and Jay Rinpoche is much more wanting to come from a conventional. He wants to give the conventional a bit more kudos than
Okay.
So that's really where. So really, when you just there doesn't seem to be much that they're disagreeing upon, apart from coming from slightly different perspectives. I
But
don't.
but what does that slightly different perspectives really mean? I mean, perspectives has to do with perception, right? Tilopa says that samsara is seeing faults in others. And Jetsun Dragpa Gyaltsen says that, all sentient beings are already Buddhas. It is only our obstructed kind of ignorance that makes us not see every sentient being as Buddha. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so then I think that's quite the kudos to conventionalism for the other folks also. So I'm just really trying to see that
Yeah.
uniqueness in Je Rinpoche's kind of explanation.
Yeah.
Like where is the extra favoritism going to the conventional side of
I
things?
see. Well, they're probably in that sense that Jay Rinpoche says no, no, no. All those other people. Let's assuming they're not Buddhas, or he will say no, no. Let's assume that there are people who still have delusions. So he'll say no, they're sentient beings. They're not. They can't be. They can't be. Um, they can't be Buddhas because they have negative emotions in their continuum. Whereas the others are saying that your perception of someone else as having negative emotions in the continuum is just your negative karmic appearance, and that their nature exists. The nature is pure, but we have a kind of karmic, negative karmic appearance due to our build up of negative emotions. I didn't quite. I'm more in favor of Jay Rinpoche on that point, because so you say, well, they're actually Buddhas, but it's like saying, well, you're actually a Buddha, but you can't see it. And they say, well, I'm not a Buddha because I have delusion in my continuum. So then they kind of, uh, what's the answer to that? I mean, they say, okay, well, there's a part of you that's the Buddha. So like, where is it? And then it's basically the kind of clear light nature of your mind, right? Something like that. But the clear, I suppose they say, okay, yeah, the sky is blue, but on cloudy days, the sky continues to be blue, and it's just that there's too many clouds in your mind, right? But actually, the sky is just blue. The sun has always been shining, but if you've got clouds in your mind, then the sun can't shine through. But it's like the sun can't shine through ever until the last moment. So I don't really see it as being very different. The sun never shines through until the last moment, because the sun shining through would be that you're actually the Buddha. So it's just a kind of way of treating analogies. The Buddha nature, Gulama, and
Mm.
those analogies fit much better with the early translation schools. Jay Rinpoche has to really work around to, the one about the clay, the statue, the golden Buddha statue in the clay, covered over with mud, right? So this is much more like Kaju or Nyingma, or even Jonang, probably even more so Jonang, that it's there already, and you've just got to kind of wash off the dirt. But what is it that's there? You know what I mean? It's what is it that's there? Yeah, if the sun's already shining, but to all intents and purposes, the sun, I never see the sunshine. Never. Because I've always got a veil. So in the end, it doesn't really sound like it's going to be any different. Because in the last moment for Jay Rimshi, the sun shines. For both of them, the sun only shines after the end of the 10th bhumi. So to tell me that the sun is always shining, but I never see it, doesn't really help me. It doesn't inspire me very much.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go back to those kind of practical difficulties, but look at it more from a language point of view. I say to you, the sun is shining. The sentence is meaningful to you. It makes sense. How can it make sense to you if you've never seen the sun before, right? There must be something innate in your mind stream or your Buddha nature or whatever else that recognizes what those utterances mean to you, right? If we were constantly disposed to delusion, and then think about Shariputra, for example, or someone, and then the Buddha just says, okay, well, every sentient being can become a Buddha insofar as they follow the Eightfold Path and the paramita, and they develop paramitas. If Shariputra was completely disposed towards delusion view, towards a delusional view, then those words would have made no sense. Then Shariputra would have never been persuaded to ask questions of the Buddha and learn Dharma and so forth. So that's...
Yeah. And in that sense, I don't know that the sun analogy works, because the actual situation would be that it would be someone who had never seen the sun and never will see the sun until, or some, actually, yeah, I see your point, that you're saying that in some sense they have seen the sun. Because like for us, we've seen sun and sunny days, and so when somebody says the sun, on a cloudy day, don't worry, that there's a silver lining, that the sun is shine,
Yeah.
But you're talking to someone who technically, if the sun is the sun is seeing the sun in the analogy is enlightenment, then the person's, well, I suppose they're going to argue they are already enlightened. But have they seen that? No, they haven't understood that they're enlightened. That's the classic phrase, isn't it? You say, you're already enlightened, but you just don't know it.
Yeah.
You don't know. So you've never seen the sun. So if you talk to someone who's never seen the sun and said the sun's always shining, you're looking at them like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what the sun is. Or what you're saying is maybe they do somehow know what the sun is, some kind of experience of their nature of their mind or something.
I mean, then you're kind of reframing the analogy as Plato's allegory of the cave, right? Where people are like somehow born in a sensory deprivation room, and then one guy somehow miraculously gets out of there and he sees natural light as it is, and then he goes back to people that have had no sensorial exposure whatsoever to sunlight, and he starts saying, there's the sun out there that is bright and shining and whatever else, and
like
these guys
are crazy. He's lost his mind, But how does the allegory end? I can't remember how the Plato's allegory ends. Because he escapes, right, and tells all the people whose shadows are reflected on the back of the cave that this is not actually, the real situation. There's something much more than this.
Yeah.
I don't dislike either. I mean, some people find the idea that, but for me, it's almost like I don't see actually any difference in meaning between the two. Because to say to me, you're already enlightened, but you don't know it, and you're not gonna know it for 3 countless eons, is that you can think about it, you can use it as a kind of, what's the word? I can't think of the right word. A sort of a tool of engagement for you to be uplifted or something. But if you actually then tell me the real situation, okay, but you're not going to know it for 3 countless eons, and in the same way the Gelugpas are saying, well, you're also not going to know it for 3 countless eons, then I'm like, but that's okay. You're not really giving me much. For me, you're not giving me any more to say it the other way, to say it that you're already like this, but you don't know it. But the don't knowing is carrying on, and there's never been knowing. So for me, it's like I feel it's like the same kind of thing. It doesn't really. Neither one is more inspiring than the other to me.
Maybe here's. I hope this helps at least, which is that when people engage in linguistic activities, there's a subtle kind of invisible commitment to truth on both sides. It's like when people speak to each other, the reason, fundamental reason why language makes sense to us is because we believe we're trying to express the truth that we understand and so forth. So there's this kind of, invisible agreement that when we engage in language, there's not only the meaning of, this is a water bottle or whatever else, but I intend to communicate to you sincerely that what I'm holding here is a water bottle, so to say. And, I think part of that is contributing to, the rousing interest sort of thing, the intellectual curiosity. But on the other hand, maybe it's, when the first turning of the wheel was the Four Noble Truths, right? So it's like, people would just say that people would just analyze the teachings. Life is dukkha, then the problems of attachments and the Eightfold Path and the removal of dukkha and ignorance and so forth. So it was maybe through this active engagement, through this constant debating and discussion and whatever else that also, grasp their interest. And we go back in the circle of what really is the instrumental value of conceptual reasoning then. Because obviously it wasn't the experience, right? It's like Tibetan schools are not sudden enlightenment schools; they're progressive enlightenment, right? So it's like it's not that the Buddha said life is dukkha and everybody just reached the 10th bhumi instantaneously or something. That would have been cool.
Although actually, bizarrely, in those early sutras, it's a very unusual thing. Because I can't read Sanskrit or Pali rather. It'll be in Pali, but it says that. He went through the 3 cycles, and it's like a little bit mysterious because you have the I can't remember the name of one of the disciples, and it says something like, or several of the disciples immediately attain the path of seeing, or something like that. It's very the Theravadan, or the Tibetans' presentation of the Theravadan paths is that they go from the path of preparation almost through to nirvana or something in one sitting or something like that. It's like very instant, whereas it's not what happens in Mahayana. So yeah,
why not? It's the same with the Nyingma school and Guru Rinpoche, right? It's like liberation upon hearing or liberation about seeing or whatever else. When Guru Rinpoche supposedly had the visions and then he wrote the Bardo Tadul, he intended that text as insofar, even the first time when somebody picks up that text, there's already, a lot of imprints being purified and they can reach directly to the sound of liberation or whatever else. So in that sense, I think that's just the more Vajrayana side of it, maybe, where it's the same thing, but the commitment is accelerated. It doesn't mean it's instantaneous, it's just fast. But it's not like,
Yeah, but it's not instantaneous, you're right. No, it's not at all.
Well,
and even John Uncles are the same. They're definitely, even though they really push the idea that we have the 32 marks and the 80 signs or whatever within us, in some kind of subtle body form already. They don't say. They say that you have to work on the long periods of time of practice to realize that. So none of them are saying, talking about instantaneous enlightenment.
Yeah, wasn't there that story where Marpa hits Naropa with the shoe, or was it?
That's right. Yeah. But I'm not sure that he becomes
the other way around.
I'm not sure he becomes enlightened. I think it's like his introduction to the nature of mind.
Yes,
So
but
yeah,
there's some swift action that
yeah,
accelerates, that significantly accelerates
yeah,
an individual's progress on the path.
yeah,
So
yeah. That could be. I don't think. I think that would be. Yeah, yeah. That I mean that would some kind of trigger or something that and also because it would be very they probably in the history they would say that they've had a long karmic connection together, and that the causes and conditions were just uh, Naropa was a very sincere student, so those kind of things. Yeah, you could say that I could see that might happen, but it's still it definitely is accelerated, but it's not. It's sort of like Introduction to Nature of Mind or something like that. I'm in Chogyam Trungpa's book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. He talks about how people can sort of when they first meet their teachers or something, they can have an experience which is something along the lines of Introduction to Nature of Mind, and then he actually says underneath it something like, "You're probably going to spend the rest of your life trying to get back to that experience and not succeed." So, there can be this. Many people who are involved in the Buddhist path had that experience, but then it's very hard to recreate it. It
but
seems.
isn't that also grasping and clinging and so forth? If you experience something awesome or something very difficult to put into words, and then you try to reconstruct your reality to go back to whatever that awesome experience was. I mean, isn't that proliferating karma and concepts and
Probably,
whatever else?
probably, but it's probably all we've got, unfortunately, because that's what we tend to do.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that's probably a fair point. Yeah, just that instead of
It,
just accepting it as an experience. Um,
it sounds more like a dog running after his own tail or something after a point.
yeah,
So
yeah, and the dog is got quite a long body and quite a short tail, so there's no way for him to actually get round. Yeah, that's I think that's a good point. Whereas if you just accept it as an experience, but then it's sort of okay. So what's Introduction to the Nature of Mind? How can you recognize the nature of mind when you haven't been doing sequential practice? And then you're into these weird kind of loop arguments about you did it in a previous life, and it's. But they still none of the Tibetan schools are sort of saying it's just that you really are the Buddha.
um
Because they're saying there are clouds. They're saying the sun is shining all the time, but the instant enlightenment school goes something like, there are no clouds. This is it. This, whatever is appearing to you right now, is Dharmakaya.
sounds convincing.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty shitty kind of Dharmakaya. I'm like, wow, I'll try Christianity.
Oh,
No, you know what I mean. But
yeah,
I mean, I suppose that's the
yeah,
point. The point is that
yeah.
we keep thinking it's something else. Oh, it's got to be this. It's got to, we fabricated the idea. You can fabricate the idea of this kind of golden light or whatever it is you think it is, and actually, that's taking, that's the argument, isn't it, for instant enlightenment, that every single, it's just taking you away from it all the time. This is it. I've studied in the Zen tradition. They're like, this is it.
Yep, yep.
Why are you going over there? This is it. Right here, right now. That pain in your knee, that's the Dharmakaya.
Yeah. But
I mean,
that does bring an interesting nuance for, the progressive schools, where it's like, okay, But if you and we can wrap up with this if you want to call it a day, since it's been an hour already.
Yeah, I got 10 minutes.
Okay. So let's say that people do have, by virtue of their meditative practice or whatever else, they have these experiences and it brings the motivation to keep practicing and whatever else. But the difficulty is, how do you know you don't delude yourself? I think it was His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself that said, thinking of yourself as some deity or some enlightened deity or something is one of the greatest forms of delusion.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's kind of the epistemic risk, if you want to call it that, with engaging with these sorts of things, where it's like, how do you know you're just not confusing yourself even more by trying? Or where's really the certainty coming from that what you experience is genuine progress on the path and not some sort of self-deluded, by virtue of imputation kind of thing. It's like you think you get it but you don't, but it's like it's like you follow the text and the typical Cartesian problem. It's like, how do I know there's no demon deceiving me or something along those lines? How do I know that this is really the truth? And his response is that God is no deceiver and whatever else. So by the clear light of God we can tell the truth from the falsity and the certainty from the doubt and whatever else. But it's like, okay, but what
That's
about
kind of self-referential though, isn't it?
Right. So my concern is, how do we know that these sorts of progressive arguments don't fall into the same problem?
We have no idea. That's why I do think that the things of having a teacher that you have a trust in, even then you don't know, of course. In the end, how do we know? Yeah, how do you know? It's a massive problem. Because, as you say, you may have been traveling down the highway to enlightenment and then turn off on a tiny little back road that takes you back towards the start, and you have no idea. You think you're on an even bigger highway, even faster, but actually you're heading back to the start line. And yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? I think in terms of deity yoga, I mean, His Holiness has always said the whole thing, deity yoga starts with dissolving into emptiness. So it's not like Simon's perception of himself, in the world, going to the coffee shop, doing this, studying, doing that. That is all gone, all of it. And then dissolve. I mean, I don't have any experience of this, but that's what you're supposed to do, is dissolve into emptiness. It's not like the way I would do it is my inherently existent Simon, some tiny bit of that ego reduces itself, and then I arise into, an inherently existent Simon, a super Simon. It's kind of like, I haven't done the process. That's why it's so dangerous, because it's like, if you don't know what is emptiness and you don't dissolve into it, then that thing where all things can manifest out of that. But because someone like me doesn't know what that is, I mean, I'm not. That's why I'm not really a tantric person, because I don't. I'm trying to spend all my time understanding bodhicitta and emptiness, not tantra, because without it, I can't see the. I mean, if my teachers tell me to do certain tantric practices, that's what you said. You have to go along. In the end, you go along a little bit on faith. This person looks like someone who's very wise. And my experience over many years is that what the teachers have told me have seemed to bring me to a better place. But maybe if I'd taken route B instead of route A, taken the red pill instead of the green one, I don't know. I can't say whether I would be in a better place, but it's a big philosophical problem, that one.
Yeah.
I mean, the choices you made, how do you know if the choices you made were the right choices? Because sometimes things which don't look like the right choice
might have been the right choice.
There's that famous line, isn't it? I can't remember. A man, what is it? I'll send it to you. You know, these you meet your fate on the road you took to avoid that fate. Or something.
Oh,
That's this great line. It was not a very cultural reference. It was in this film called The International, which is a kind of, but he uses this line. I think it's a fairly modern philosopher. Somebody meet their fate on the path they took to get away from it. You know. So that I don't know. How do Western philosophers deal with that?
I mean, depends if they're religious philosophers or not, right? I mean,
Yeah.
religious philosophers, pick or choose whatever passages they like from Christianity and then tell you why those are the best and why you should, work with those. But maybe an interesting, I mean, right, there's debates of whether or not we have free will or whether or not the universe is pre-programmed and we're all determined to behave. And, some people take it through that route.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have more of a fascination with this kind of dialectic of reason between Marx and Hegel. So Hegel is saying that, it is first the ideation, the realm of ideas, and then it materializes. There's like conditions of realizability, meaning, how material, decomposes from energetic, abstract into the material space of our everyday object. So it's like first I think about drinking water because I'm thirsty, and then I reach out to the water bottle, and then here's the water and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And then Marx would say, no, the dialectic should actually be the other way around, which is it is the material circumstances that give rise to our ideas. Namely, if I'm born in Europe, chances are that I'll be Christian. If I'm born in India, chances are that I'll be a Hindu or a Muslim. If I'm born in such and such place. So it's really the community, the social kind of circumstances that you are born in that really shape your mindset, that shape your beliefs, that shape your desires. And then,
I see. Those create your mental makeup.
Right. It's kind of like a precursor to the nature and nurture debate in psychology. It's like, are we born with a blank slate, and then our parents and our social community just impute, this is your name, this is your gender, this is your birthday, this is your phone number, this is what you like for breakfast, and whatever else. Or is it really that at some point you acknowledge that, oh yeah, this is what the community has guided me to say or to think, but eventually, there is some pudgala, some sort of individual personhood here that has the capacity to make decisions. And I think even in Buddha Dharma, that's a very difficult kind of debate to have, because there's no self, right? It's like who is the I that is undergoing the action? Who is the I that does the thinking? Who's the I that does the speech? Who's the I that does the movement? It's like, if I think I'm thirsty and whatever else, it's like my body is satisfied of thirst, but I can't say that, Andrei is satisfied of thirst, maybe to a looser extent or something, right? It's like, there's all these interesting kind of, gymnastics we can do with names and whatever else. And yeah, I think that brings difficulty to really pinning what exactly does it mean for an agent, because agency doesn't exist, at least to my understanding, and in Buddhism, agency doesn't exist. So then it's like, how do we talk about right view, right concentration, right effort if there's no I to begin with? Then who is doing all of this kind of spiel going on, sort of thing? And it's not like Shantideva is helping much either in that respect, because he wrote everything in poetry, right? And then towards the end of the Bodhicharya Avatara, he's like, who else who is even going to reach enlightenment? Even I gave up on enlightenment or whatever else. It has some really pessimistic kind of stuff in it. So then it really makes you wonder. We go back to our earlier discussion. What's the point? It feels so discouraging. All these questions, all these doubts and uncertainties. Where do we go with it? And even if we make a positive change, how do we know it really is positive? How do we know if it's going to last? And so on.
Some of those sort of almost those instantaneous enlightenment or godhood or whatever you call it, they'd argue that any attempt to walk the path is already walking you away from the real situation. That every even the very thought I want to get enlightened for some schools will be a barrier. Will be a what's the word? You're actually already stepping backwards. You're walking backwards away from, whilst thinking you're walking forwards. So it is. But I think I'm a pragmatist, and I think that I really can't know those things. I'll never be able to know them. Maybe I might, if I did reach enlightenment and look back and go, oh wow, okay, that was a wrong path or something. But in the end, we make the best decisions based on the information that we have at hand. I mean, there's the kind of free will argument, isn't it? Why did I make that decision? Was I really in control of that, or was that control? Buddhists have a little bit the sort of karmic free will loop problem also. So or was it just my karma making me think that? And, I don't know. But for me, it's like I can't know that anyway. If I had access to it, and then if I had access to that knowledge, then I could. But if it's knowledge I'm never going to have access to, then I'm more willing to just leave it and say, well, I just make the best decisions in the situation I'm in, and I'll just have to live with those consequences because I can't do anything else, because I don't know. Looks to me like I choose this path. My teachers seem to be I never wanted to study debate. I thought I was a great Dzogchen master, and then my teacher explained to me that I wasn't a great Dzogchen master, and I should go back to square one, which was disappointing, but probably a very good thing. But and 16 years later, it's like, and I didn't really want to. I was like, I'll do a few years, and then and actually, I would argue, although I can't prove it to you. There's no way for me to prove it. But I will argue that was some of the best advice I was given. I mean, that kind of came out of the blue from my teacher a bit. He's sort of, one of my earlier teachers, and I think it was the best thing that happened to me. But how can I definitively explain to you that that's the case? Because if you have a kind of bunch of parallel universes where have I done this and I've done that, maybe I'd already be enlightened if I hadn't done this. The early translation schools will say that the Galupas are just filling their heads with too much conceptual thought, and that's all gotcha. That's all object of negation. Stop it. So how can I tell you that I only have the sense that it was the best thing to do? Can I prove it to you? No way, not possible. Do I feel an innate sense within myself that was the best thing to do? Yes.
I think that's good enough.
More information, I have no knowledge and information. I've had experiences with my teachers where they seem to be accessing knowledge which is beyond my knowledge, and therefore I have a trust in them. But does that mean that they're always going to get it right? Maybe they got it right 2 or 3 times, and the 4th time they didn't. But I can't know that. And so for those arguments, those kind of arguments, I'm quite pragmatic. I'm like, well, if I could get that other knowledge, whatever knowledge I've got, I'll try to make the best decision on the knowledge I've got, But if you say to me, well, there might be this other knowledge, but you're not going to know it, what do you think about it? I'm like, there's a kind of non-question to me, because I haven't got the knowledge, so I can't say anything about it.
We lack logical omniscience, right?
We do.
We can't see all the possible worlds unfolding before us before they actually happen, and then be like, oh yeah, this is the best one, we'll go with this one, or something along those lines.
Sure. We can see, I'm sure that when you're doing your studies and stuff, you choose a particular school and you apply to that school because you're interested in something or something like that, and then you think, well, if I could, that I could do this and that, but you've no idea if that actually, you might go to one college which didn't seem like the best college, but then meet an incredible teacher, and and it could your life, you don't know that. I'll try and go to MIT or Harvard or something because it's the best college. It might be a terrible experience and ruin your career or something. I don't know. You can't know those things. I mean, I don't know what it's called. It's kind of pragmatism, isn't it, or something like that. I'm like, I don't really like that kind of philosophy, which sort of, I can admit to not knowing. I think that's the best way to say it. I can admit to having no idea whether it's the best thing or not, but I have no other choice because I haven't got any other information apart from know that sometimes, I mean, you can't know actually anything, can you? Maybe it would have been better if I'd stayed as an alcoholic. I mean, how do I know? I have no idea about that, I think it's better than I'm not, but how do I know that? I might have met the Tilopa down the place where Naropa met Tilopa is there's in the hagiography, it's very close to Dharamsala. It's about 2 hours by bus where he fries the fish. And it's called Tilakpur. There's actually a very unusual story that happened. I'll tell you another time. But those kind of how I mean, how do we know these things? Apart from to just go on the available knowledge and some trust and faith that we're going in the right direction. I mean, yes, I can't. I don't know what's the branch of Western philosophy that deals with these kind of issues.
I mean, all these kind of questions permeate all of the branches of philosophy.
Yeah.
I mean, the debates about epistemology and is there something real beyond our ability to reach to them with sciences? Is there some knowable truths that are non-scientific, nor are they ever scientifically accessible in some way?
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it's really down to epistemology, isn't it? Because it's the whole question of how can you validly know? How do you validly know if you know? How do you know that you know?
Yeah, even really hardcore skeptics would have some axiomatic kind of, they say this is the smallest thing that faith necessitates, and then we can, and then we don't need anything beyond that. It's like if you assume for sure that 1 + 1 = 2. If you know for sure that the sign plus always means addition or something extraordinarily minimal like that, they'll say, okay, well, this is enough faith-based reason for us to explain a lot of interesting things without the supernatural or whatever else.
Like we do with mathematics or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mainly work with language and politics and whatever else, so I don't know too much about.
But it comes into things as well, I'm sure, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right? Because I think to some extent we all have to be comfortable with our uncertainties. The questions that you're asking are questions that I'm asking myself also. Am I in the right city? Am I studying the right subject? Am I exposed to the right educators? Could I have been somewhere better and received a better education that would, propel my career differently or put me on a path that can help me help other sentient beings more, or all these sorts of questions. I think they're inevitable, and I think the safest answer is that there's no right answer to them.
There's no right. I mean, we can't know if the answer is right or wrong, but the answer, as my Zen teacher would say, is the one you chose. That's the answer. It's just like he says when you say things like when you stop doing something, that's when you've stopped. It's not like you don't talk about when I'm going to stop, or it's just like, okay, At some point you'll start doing this, or you'll stop doing that, or you'll choose that, and that's how does that happen? How does that whole process happen? It's kind of a bit mystical, you know. But we still navigate by making decisions. That you could end up with, you could go to Harvard and have the best technical professor, but he might be completely uninspiring. I was trying to do one of these EDX courses on logic and computational science. I'm not interested in computer programming or anything, but I'm interested in logic, and I wanted to learn a bit of logic from the Western perspective. And it's called Logic and Computational Science, I think. And the guy who runs that course is, for me, is such a good teacher. And he taught in a community college somewhere in America, up in like Oregon, no, Washington State, a community college in Washington State. But he was incredible. I thought he was just incredibly clear and good at explaining his subject.
Mm-hmm.
Like really, like he was. He didn't have that ego thing. He was. I mean, it's just, you know, we came from some community college, and he's working for Microsoft now. But you know, it was a Microsoft course. But really excellent. You know, so I mean, you know, you could end up with someone that you go to a school that's very prestigious. Okay, you get a prestigious degree, but you have no idea if that would, like you said, especially as you have another ulterior motive of also helping others. You're not, I mean, of course, you're in the academic world, and you have to be academic to be in the academic world. I'm not an academic, but many academics don't have that perspective, like, I'm going to try and help others.
I don't know. I ask myself that all the time, and I still don't think I found a reasonable answer as to if what I'm studying actually is inspiring and insightful to other people than my own kind of intellectual curiosity, so to say. So, yeah, because see, I initially studied international relations, and then we had optional courses in philosophy, kind of the elective side of things. And I chose philosophy, and the professor was just telling me, "You're good at this. Why don't you keep going with philosophy?"
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I ended up studying both. So that's why I'm kind of having these qualms of, am I really like contributing to society and so forth by studying philosophy? Is that really doing something interesting, or should I have just stuck with international relations and maybe, you know, contribute to the making of a policy that would, you know, reduce harm in some region or lead to a cleaner environment or some sort of climate change policy or what have you? So, you know, these are some of the pragmatic, so to say, questions that I'm kind of, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. Again, it's very difficult to know, isn't it? Here, there's my school is not really sort of in session, you know. So, the school is arranging sort of a kind of, you know, simple feeding program to very poor people in the area, and the director has some connection with some sponsors, and they're helping him to distribute food. And I haven't offered. I often offer to help people, but I haven't offered to do that. And I've decided to stay at home and have discussions like these, and read my books and translate and do some meditation and go walking in the forest, and instead of doing that, you know. But then it's like, well, what's the use of all of that to someone who's worried about where the next meal is coming from, you know? Mm-hmm. But having said that, I'm also trying to do more, you know, meditation, and you know, if you take the Buddhist path at face value, they'll say that if you're sincere about that, then that's one of the most useful things you can do. But it's always that balance, isn't it, about, you know, engaging. I mean, I suppose that technically, from a Buddhist perspective, we have to just be looking at our minds and seeing whether attachment, desire, ignorance seem to be increasing, staying the same, or do they seem to be not just the peace of mind? I think because the peace of mind, you know, like the mindfulness movements and things like this, you know, it's sort of you know, can be very self-centered sometimes. Yeah. Like you, not numbing out, but just sort of, it can become unconcerned with the world. But you know, I guess that's the only reference point in the end, is just to see whether identifying the delusions and seeing whether they are improving in ourselves or not. I mean, otherwise, and that for me, that's why I'm a pragmatist. Is that, well, okay, that's all I've got to go on. If there's some other mystical thing, like Brahma has some great plan, and you know, I'm just part of Brahma's hologram. That's, you know, well, like, I mean, in a way, it doesn't really, you know, that thing about if the Buddha knows everything, then he knows when Andrei is going to get enlightened. And so it doesn't matter what Andrei does, because he's gonna get enlightened on the 4th of July, 2642, and that's when it's gonna happen, right? Let's say not too optimistic, but not too bad. It's only 600. Sure. Simon's much later than that, but then that's your date. But Andrei doesn't know that. So Andrei's making, but it doesn't matter what, you know, the argument goes, it doesn't matter what choice you make, because it doesn't matter Andrei's choice. Whatever he decides to do, he's going to end up enlightened on that date, at that time, because the Buddha's seen it and it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean,
there's something wrong with that argument.
Yeah. The Buddhas were having these, the Buddha, and I think the early generations, the pre-Theravada Buddhists, like the in-between, they were having debates with the Charvakas and the Jains and whatever else, you know, because some of them were saying it takes exactly four aeons to reach enlightenment, unshakably 4 aeons.
Yeah.
And no matter what you do, whether you practice, whether you don't practice, that's why a lot of people would say, so why should we practice samatha and vipassana? If it is 4 fixed aeons for everyone, I can just sit at home and watch TV and, you know, 4 aeons are going to go by and whatever else.
Yeah,
so those are kind of the early difficulties also with that.
Yeah. There's some sort of, there seems to me some philosophical fault with the argument. I haven't quite, because to me it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna, I had a friend here called Mr. Raj, who was an amazing Sanskrit scholar. He was the bizarrest man. He spoke about 16 languages, and he could read Egyptian hieroglyphics, and he spoke like Lithuanian and all this kind of. He was an amazing man, super humble, and he used to do about 6 or 8 hours of Vipassana a day. And he was a diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service, and he gave away 75% of his pension to the poor, and kept 25%, and he had 2 shirts and 2 pairs of trousers. And he would just like wash one, and it was the most bizarre character, most wonderful man, and we had a lot of discussions, and he was very sort of skeptical, and he would sort of, I mean, it was sort of, I've lost my thread now. It's kind of like, why did I bring up Mr. Raj? I mean, I don't.
There's only this much we can do.
Yeah.
Basically.
I mean, I've got a certain number of choices in front of me, and I look at those choices and I make the best choice. And to me, he would bring up this point, but it was like this. I felt like, he used to say, he wasn't in karma. The idea of karma to him wasn't a stick beating him to do better, because he was never going to hurt anybody anyway. And he always tried to make choices which were the best choices for himself and others. So karma wasn't like this. The idea of karma wasn't a carrot, because he wasn't going to go and it wasn't like, oh well, if there's no karma, I'm going to go and chop someone's head off for the fun of it.
Right.
And, I'm sure you're the same. You're not going to go and beat someone up because you always wanted to, but you were worried that if you did it, there'd be a nasty karmic result. You just don't want to do it, right? You don't want to. There are other things we do which are perhaps, sometimes in our lives we do things where you think, oh, I shouldn't really do that, but we're not going to suddenly just become bad people because somebody proves to us that karma doesn't exist. We're going to make those choices anyway. It's not like, oh well, nobody's looking, I'll do it, or it's like, I don't want to do that because that's an unethical or unhealthy choice, and it might cause harm. So that's a way of sort of navigating along life whilst always having as you say, there's always a timestamp, and it's 4 eons. I'm not gonna. I mean, I'm not gonna say, well, I'm just gonna watch TV for the first 3, and then I'll do something, because if you run into someone who, doesn't have money, or I don't know, or whatever circumstance that one of your relatives becomes sick and you have to help them, or you have to choose whether you're going to help them or not, then we're probably going to make those choices anyway. We're not going to, it's not like, I don't really see that argument as a sort of, I don't know. For me, it's not an argument because I'm going to try and make the right choices in every moment, and I don't always succeed. I definitely don't, but I'm going to try. So that drives my life, not thinking, oh well, I'll just sit back for now. I'll have to go because actually the power's out. We've had no power all day, and my battery's down to 10% on the computer.
Okay, all the best. It was fun chatting with you.
Yeah, and we'll. I was going to suggest one thing. What was it for a topic for next time? We touched on it. I'll have a think anyway. We can go backwards and forwards in WhatsApp.
Okay, sounds good. Take care.
Thank you very much, Andrei.
Awesome.
Thank